Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're excited you've come to join us today for our panel on a just transition to green coffee here at the COP. We are here in Sharm el-Sheikh and are eager to have a really dynamic discussion about how we can transform the coffee industry into one which is even more sustainable, both for the environment and for the people that are making coffee itself. My name is Randall Kempner, and I am working as a consultant to the Global Development Incubator and also serving as CEO of the Biochar Market Catalyst, and I will be your moderator today. I'm joined by an extraordinary group of panelists who are going to dive into this, what we hope will be dynamic discussion. So we have Mario from Lavazza, we have Kathleen from the International Biochar Initiative, we have Axel from Net Zero, and Suli, who is a coffee grower in Guatemala, who will give us the real story. I wanted to start, however, with a little bit of audience interaction and a quiz here early morning. So the quiz, how many cups a day of coffee are consumed in the world? 3 cups? No, 3 total. In total. Axel knows. You can't answer. He got it right. It's 2 billion cups of coffee a day. 2 billion. All right, bonus question. Which country drinks the most coffee per capita in the world? Why do you know these things? Of course he knows. The answer is Finland, which is not what most people would think. I would have thought you would have said your native country of Italy.
Yeah, I wanted.
He's disappointed that Italy is not number 1, but it turns out that the countries in the far north drink the most. So Scandinavians win. Numbers 2 and 3, I think, are Denmark and the Netherlands, or maybe it's Sweden, but Finland is by far number 1. So coffee, in addition to providing us all much needed caffeine, is a very significant economic engine for the world. I have a few more stats that I wanted to share. According to Brand Essence, the global coffee market across its entire value chain is around $356 billion a year. That is equal to the 45th largest economy in the world. It would be just above Chile and just below Colombia in terms of its overall economic output were it a nation. And it would smell better than any other country in the world. About 90% of coffee is produced in developing countries. And worldwide, over 125 million people depend upon coffee for their livelihoods. But unfortunately, many of those people are not living a livelihood which is strong. There are many people still in poverty that are producing coffee. On the environmental side, each one of those 2 billion cups of coffee a day accounts for between 0.3 and 0.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions. And so if you do the math at 2 billion cups a day, we end up with about 220 to 360 million tons of CO2 equivalents being emitted by the coffee industry. That's about a little less than half of 1% of all of the emissions across the globe. And that's just the carbon emissions. As we all know, there are other potential environmental challenges with coffee, including deforestation, soil erosion, and water contamination. Good news is that the Royal Geographic Society in the UK has done research to show that sustainably produced coffee can lead to up to 77% reduction in carbon emissions per kilogram. So there are solutions out there for both the environmental and the economic challenges of coffee, and it can be transformed into an industry which is even more helpful for society than it is today. And again, as I mentioned, I'm joined by some people who are in the industry who are working on these solutions. And so I wanted to start with you, Mario, if I may, and ask you to talk more about Lavazza and its commitment to corporate social responsibility and how your programs integrate both environmental and social considerations.
Well, thank you very much, Randall, and I apologize for my voice, but it's gone. So I will use the last few moments I can talk. No, thank you for the question. Let's put it this way. Coffee is a commodity that has the enormous potential of being friendly to the environment and friendly to the people. We're not there, as you said, but there is a potential to do that. So that should actually be the goal of all of us. Now, in terms of a program, we started 25 years ago, more or less, and 20 years ago we set up our Lavazza Foundation, which is the instrument we use to develop a sustainability project in coffee producing area. More recently, and to go straight to the point we are discussing this morning, there are two things that I would like to say. First of all, one of these activities, one of these projects, to be effective, has to be very much omnicomprehensive. It should really address a few things, not just one. So you have the search for good agricultural practices, you have a gender component that normally is very important, you have an organizational component, and so on and so forth. So a project is really a multifaceted activity that you carry on. But more recently, the CO2 impact of coffee production is really getting very high in the agenda of one of these activity. And so what we basically do, we start from being able to measure. We think that this is the most important thing to do. If you don't measure, you don't really know what you're talking about. So we developed inside the company, in my area, we have a small unit with 2 PhDs and a couple of other people that are actually measuring the impacts almost of everything, products, activities, etc. And then the second important phase is, of course, reduction, reducing the impact. And reduction is basically through increased efficiency of operation. And in coffee, the operation in coffee, and so I'm actually going in your direction, is basically 90% of the impact that we have is the so-called scope 3, which is not under direct control. And of that 90%, another 75% is coffee production. So everything that can be done at the coffee production level is by far much more important than anything you can do in terms of industrial efficiency, transportation, and so on and so forth, which we do, but of course with let's say the target are much lower. So in terms of coffee production, there are a lot of research going on, a lot of activities. For example, there is one group, it's called the World Coffee Research, we belong to, we participate, and that group is looking for applying the genetic of coffee, genetic research on coffee, varieties, etc., into coffee production. The idea is to find varieties that can cope with the climate change, can cope with the changing situation at the production level, but also in terms of emission, maybe plants that need less fertilizers, which of course means less emissions, and so on and so forth. So that is one. The other one is, for example, on irrigation. We have 2 or 3 projects, Brazil, Colombia, and Honduras, where by using technology, we try to reduce the water consumption given the same productivity of coffee. So, for example, in Brazil, we succeeded now we basically reach 25% of saving in the water. And water is not only water, but is water plus all the gasoline, all the energy you need to pump the water from down the soil into the plantation. So it's a big impact, and so we are actually aiming. We hope to reach 40% of water saving, and this is a very important component. So there are a lot of ideas, a lot of instruments, a lot of field. And I'm just mentioning quickly because I don't want to steal the time from the very interesting things they have to say. But if you think about, for example, the circular economy concept, to apply that to coffee from the beginning, from the nursery up to the end, there is a huge area, a huge potential to improve the impact of coffee. So that is basically, thank you, is basically the idea we are trying to apply in our foundation.
So Kathleen, you work closely with coffee growers in Colombia on a project I think sponsored by Starbucks, and you're at the farm level trying to help them live better lives and have more ecological coffee production. So can you share a little bit more about what you're doing and the tools that you're using to make that happen?
Sure. First, I want to make sure that everybody knows what biochar is. If not, I can do the high level. I describe it as burnt toast. So it's taking organic material, putting it in something like an oven, cranking up the heat and burning off the water, and you get this black stuff, which is not viewed as a food source by microbes. So when you put it in the soil, you're breaking the carbon cycle. You're turning a short-lived carbon into a long-lasting carbon. And I have a couple of examples in case you haven't seen it before, which Makhdeen, I'll ask you. This is made from coffee husk. It's also made from coffee sacks, and it's made from cardboard. And I warn you not to open it because your fingers will get all black. But I just thought that would be helpful to visualize what it is. But one of the things I've been working on for the last few years is showing smallholder farmers in Colombia how to turn their coffee prunings into biochar. And you can do it with very low-tech methods. It doesn't have to cost any money. And it's a way to carbonize both the coffee prunings and sometimes other residues that they have. And we've blended it with the effluent that they have during the coffee harvesting season to turn that biochar into a slow-release fertilizer. And this year, they've just come out, or they're about to come out, with a new methodology focused on smallholder farmers that can convert their own residues into biochar and then use it on farm, and they will be paid for this carbon preserving service. And it's not like changing revenues. I mean, it might be $100 per hectare just for the coffee tree prunings. But what we're finding farmers, at least in Colombia, are most excited about is if they can make their own fertilizer and reduce the need to purchase fertilizer, they're getting pretty excited about that. And we know from Mario's discussion that fertilizer it comes with a pretty heavy carbon footprint. So we haven't quantified all the reductions yet. I think that'll be the next phase of what we need to do. And I know Axel has been working on this as well, but I think we're going to see a pretty significant reduction at the farm level of the carbon footprint, which is pretty exciting.
So Axel, you've also been working with biochar, but on a different continent, principally in Africa and Cameroon, and also at a different level. You've been doing it at the milling stage as opposed to the farm stage. So can you share a little bit more about what Net Zero's work looks like and some of the initial results you've been seeing in terms of the environmental impact and social impact?
Well, thank you. So Net Zero is a startup, and we are trying to bring this wonderful product, biochar, at scale in the tropics. We feel there's a huge opportunity to turn very large amount of crop residues that have little to no valorization scheme to biochar that can be used to improve agriculture because of the water retention properties of biochar, because of the nutrient retention property, because biochar corrects soil acidity, and usually in the tropics soils are quite acidic, and because biochar helps develop microbial life in soil. So all of this has very strong impact on agriculture. And the trick is, how do you bring that at scale? How do you find a suitable model that can be operated in one site profitably, but then can be operated potentially in hundreds of sites? And so what we are trying to do is to find a model that basically works through the carbon removal properties of biochar and through the carbon credits that can be sold to corporates to finance access, very cheap access to biochar for farmers. And once you crack that nut, then the potential is huge. So we've been building and operating actually the largest biochar plant in Africa, in Cameroon. We are currently building, actually assembling almost as we speak today, our second plant in Brazil. And we started on coffee, and coffee has this great property of there can be a very circular model. So we get the coffee husk, we turn that into biochar, and you bring it back to the field. Coffee has a very strong culture about quality, about labels, and so on. And so there's a way for farmers to basically get a premium out of the quality of coffee. And as Mario was saying, coffee has really embraced this idea that they need to reduce the Scope 3 emissions. And biochar provides a very strong solution here. Our numbers is you can basically reduce emissions by about 40%, 40. 2/3 of it through reduction of usage of fertilizers, and 1/3 of it by insetting the carbon into the soil in the form of biochar. And this comes at a profit for farmers because they spend less on fertilizers, less on water, energy, and so on, and because they increase yield. And on top of that, they might be able to get a premium because the coffee will be less CO2 intensive. So it's a very virtuous model where in a circular approach, you're allowed to improve the agriculture, improve the standard of living, and reduce CO2. So it's not, okay, CO2 reduction will be costly, and we hear that in many supply chains, and this is going to be complex and so on. It's available technology, and it can be profitable. And so that's really what we are trying to demonstrate at scale. We have a plan to build 4 plants in Brazil next year, and then scaling that up.
Thanks, and we'll come back with a few more questions about how to do that and the various impacts. But Suli, I am particularly pleased to have you on this panel because you actually make coffee. A lot of us like to drink it. A lot of us like to drink it. Some of us like to produce it. Some of us like to have technological advances to support it. But again, you make it. So can you please tell us a little bit about what you do and the efforts that you've had at your coffee plantation around fair trade coffee, and how that impacts your life and the life of your colleagues?
I'll ask for the other microphone, thanks.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Zuli Granados.
Hello, good morning. My name is Zuli Granados.
Soy de Guatemala, productora de café.
I'm a coffee producer from Guatemala.
En realidad me siento muy contenta de estar en esta gran actividad.
I'm very, very happy to be here in this large activity.
La oportunidad de representar a los jóvenes y a las mujeres productoras de café.
And having the opportunity to represent young and women small-scale producers.
En mi vida nunca había estado en una COP27.
I've never been in a COP27 in my life.
Lo cual estoy tan agradecida porque hay personas que están viendo el trabajo que hacen los productores.
I feel very grateful because people are seeing the work that producers are doing.
Al final, la voz de los productores y la presencia de los productores está acá.
The voice of producers is here.
Y es de agradecerlo.
And I'm really grateful for that.
Soy productora de café.
I'm a coffee producer.
Les presento mi café que se llama Ixcapé.
This is my coffee, it's called Ixcapé.
Que en idioma maya significa café de mujer.
In Mayan it means women's coffee.
Soy parte de una iniciativa de poder visibilizar el trabajo que realizamos como mujeres.
This is part of an initiative that seeks to visualize the work women are doing.
Es un café sostenible.
It's a sustainable coffee.
Que vela por la naturaleza.
That seeks to improve the environment.
Agradezco tanto, ¿verdad?, por la oportunidad que me dan de estar aquí y presentar el café.
I'm very grateful to be here and be able to show it to you.
Actualmente somos 600 mujeres productoras,
At the moment, we're 600 women producers.
lo cual para nosotros es muy satisfactorio,
For us, that's very satisfying.
dar a conocer el trabajo que se realiza.
And being able to show you the work we are doing.
Suli, can you share a little bit more about the steps that you're taking to ensure that there is both environmental progress and good wages for the women with whom you work?
Como productores, gracias. Como productores es muy difícil ganar dinero y cuidar al medio ambiente.
As producers, it's very challenging to be able to earn a good income and take care of the environment.
Pero hay prácticas que pueden juntarse,
But there are practices we can put in place
más que todo para mejorar los suelos.
to improve the quality of the soil,
De esa forma ayuda a tener más ingresos
to be able to have a better income out of what you produce.
y nos ayuda a conservar el medio ambiente.
And at the same time, that enables us to take care of the environment in a better way.
Para todo eso se necesita financiamiento,
But for all of that, we need finance,
asistencia técnica,
technical assistance,
acceso a mercados.
market access.
Considero que si logramos este conjunto, podemos lograr que de alguna forma sí funcione.
And we need all these elements to work together to be able to actually earn an income and take care of the environment as well.
El apoyo a los pequeños productores es primordial,
Support to small-scale producers is critical.
ya que muchas veces nos vemos en situaciones difíciles.
Many times we face very challenging situations.
Sí sabemos cómo producirlo, sí sabemos qué hacer, pero muchas veces encontramos limitantes
We know how to produce, we know how to work, but we do have our limitations.
y es cuando debemos actuar.
And that's when we need to act.
Fair Trade nos ha ayudado a adaptarnos a los cambios climáticos que últimamente se están viendo.
Fair trade has helped us to better adapt to the current climate situation we're seeing,
Con diferentes proyectos en nuestras comunidades, en Latinoamérica,
via different projects in our communities in Latin America,
cumpliendo cada uno de los criterios.
we fulfill each criteria that you have within fair trade.
Considero que ha sido una de las mejores decisiones poder estar en comercio justo,
I think that's been one of the best decisions I made joining fair trade.
Hay prácticas que realmente no las hacíamos anteriormente,
There are practices we've never done prior to that,
las cuales ahora vamos de la mano,
and now we are hand in hand with them,
siempre y cuando pensando en el medio ambiente, que los productores es lo que hacen,
always considering the environment as well,
y pensando en nuestra vida, ¿verdad? En nuestra vida financiera más que todo.
and also thinking about us and what is our financial situation.
So Mario, can you say a little bit more about how Lavazza is working with smallholder farmers and the different programs that you have in place to help with the technical assistance and the financing and the support that might be necessary to help farmers like Suli all around the world?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, congratulations to you for your group of women. This is a very nice and very good news. Actually, in Guatemala is of course is one of the best coffee producing countries for qualities, etc. But it's also, from our point of view, very interesting because we have 2 or 3 projects there, and one of these projects, which is one I really do care a lot, started a few years ago with a group of 20 women that had a difficult situation, difficult life, and they joined together to use coffee as a way to address, not to solve, but to address their personal issues, their family issues. So this group of women, we help them a little bit with mainly technical assistance, plans, and basically everything that was needed to start moving forward. And now we are very, very happy because this group now has 200 women, and a lot of things are really getting much better. So this is an example. It came to my mind simply because, of course, we are talking about Guatemala, but in general, we at this moment have 32 projects in 18 countries, from Vietnam to Brazil, going through Africa, mainly in Ethiopia, and Tanzania, Uganda, and so on. And of course in Central America, basically from Mexico to Brazil, all the producing countries, we are active. In general, the major issue is really developing the entrepreneurial capabilities of smallholders, small growers. And this is a very fundamental point because coffee is a product for smallholders. About 75% of the coffee, or between 70 and 80, depends on the definition of smallholders, is made by them. And so basically there is no future of coffee if there is no smallholders. In many areas it's impossible to mechanize. Probably in your area is the same. You cannot have a huge truck to go in the field to harvest or to plant or to do agricultural activities, as it is, for example, in other products, in maize, in flavor, in the soya, etc. So the fact that you cannot mechanize means that it's important to have people, and the smallholder is a small community, can be one person up to work on the coffee field. So what is very important is to understand, in our opinion, that this person, she and the other ladies are entrepreneurs, that every morning they have to take an entrepreneurial decision. So everything that can be done to help them, not only in, let's say, hardware, in seeds or fertilizer or credit, etc., but really on developing the capabilities to take a very important decision, even if it's small, but for the producer is very important, is basically what we try to do.
So what we've heard is that coffee is a business. It requires entrepreneurial attitudes. Kathleen and Axel, you are promoting a technology, biochar, that clearly has environmental benefits, but make the case that it has strong business benefits. Why is this a good idea for smallholder farmers to use this particular technology?
Well, I'm going to echo something that Axel already spoke about, and I briefly mentioned, is that it's less about the carbon buildup in the soil and more about reducing their input costs, such as fertilizer, and increasing, yield. It's a little hard to measure year on year because there's so much variability in the weather, but it's, I think it's building the resilience to some of these climate impacts and at least giving them a chance to have yields in periods when there's high drought or too much rain. And it's also the ability to invest in their soils, which is, what many of them in Colombia described as that's their pension. That's what they're going to leave to their children, hopefully. But this is both a short-term decision in terms of reducing input costs, but also a long-term decision in terms of resiliency of their soils, and potentially we're seeing some impact on resistance to things like rust. But I think the jury's still a little bit out on that. We're waiting on some of the longer-term science, but that's an exciting thing for farmers if it is shown to be true.
Yeah. So Axel, I think you've actually done some research into the impacts on the farmers with whom you and your colleagues work. Can you share some of that?
Yes, I was mentioning some numbers early on, and I think what is interesting with biochar is not a magic wand that will solve, all the coffee problems, but it has the potential to, reduce the CO2 footprint while improving standards of living and improving quality of soils. And this idea has been kind of growing and has been more and more studied by science and so on. So I think now it's kind of fairly known. There's another parameter here, which is the speed. Because we all talk about climate change and adaptation and fair practices and so on as if we had time. And I was at the Rio conference in '92 and we had time at that time. Now we don't have time. I mean, we see climate change impacting very strongly coffee production. I was in Brazil a few months ago, and they have plantation between 500 and 600 meters. And those ones, they need to replant everything because of the change of temperature. And so they need to go higher. We've talked about the issue about water and so on. And it's not as if, okay, if we take 5 years, it's fine. If we take 10 years, it's fine. If we take 50 years, it's fine. The change is happening now. So we need to find solutions now at scale. Same thing for CO2 reduction. We can't say, okay, in 2200, we'll solve the problem. We need to be net zero in the world in 2050. And I think the coffee supply chain needs to, anticipate that. So that means scaling solutions very, very quickly. And I think this is the challenge. I mean, the COP27 is the COP of, putting things into action. Maybe at last, I would say, after 30 years of, first denial and then, a lot of talking and so, and there's been a lot of individual actions. And I think what Lavazza has been doing is remarkable in terms of number of countries and, footprint of what you've been doing. But if you think about the coffee industry, it needs to be at a humongous scale and very, very quickly. And I think that's the challenge. And so finding a model that has a kind of economic sense can help scale faster. Because if it's just, okay, we need to pour money onto something, then it's going to take some decades and then we're doomed.
So let me ask you, Suli, having heard these conversations, yeah, I would love to know what steps you have been taking to change your farm practices to become more environmentally sustainable, and in particular if biochar is one of them.
Y particularmente si utilizas biochar. Entonces, ¿qué prácticas ambientales estás haciendo ahora para poder mejorar la sustentabilidad de tu café?
Entonces, creo que sería, ¿cuáles son los desafíos?
No, o sea, podrías decir un poco los desafíos, pero ¿qué es lo que estás haciendo?
Como productores, siempre digo que uno de los desafíos, primero que nada, más grande es adaptarnos al cambio climático.
As a producer, I always say that one of the biggest challenges is to adapt to climate change.
Pero en realidad, ¿qué hacemos como productores? Lo que hacemos es semanas de la naturaleza.
But what do we do as producers? That depends on nature.
Trabajamos día a día conservando nuestros suelos.
We work every day trying to preserve our soil.
En realidad creo que es algo sorprendente cómo el impacto del cambio climático ha afectado en nuestras comunidades y en la producción de café.
And we see the impact of climate change in our communities and in our coffee.
Si bien es cierto, jóvenes y mujeres ya no quieren cosechar.
And women and young people are no longer interested in producing coffee.
¿Qué es lo que hacemos entonces?
So what do we do now?
Debemos enfrentar situaciones y ir de la mano con el medio ambiente.
We need to go hand in hand with the environment.
Si dejamos por un lado el medio ambiente y solo queremos generar ganancias, al final nos va a afectar de la misma manera.
If we ignore that and we just focus on earning, then we will be affected in the long term in a negative way.
Trabajamos bajo sombra, se podría decir, como cultivamos donde hay sombra, hay árboles.
We work underneath shade, where you have different types of trees.
Tratamos la manera de volvernos más orgánicos que convencionales.
We try to go more towards organic than conventional.
tratamos de conservar el agua y reducirla
We try to
o reutilizarla.
either preserve, reduce, or reutilize water.
Realmente como productores es un gran esfuerzo trabajar en la agricultura,
And that's a lot of effort for every producer.
porque lo estoy diciendo yo, lo estamos viviendo en carne propia, se podría decir,
I'm saying it, but we're living it every day.
pero al mismo tiempo no podemos dejar abandonado y seguir.
But we cannot let this go and just give up.
Gracias.
Just to follow up, if I may, what are the biggest differences in the way you are cultivating coffee today from 10 years ago?
Una de las diferencias es que nuestros antepasados cultivaban de una manera muy diferente.
So our ancestors did cultivate coffee in a very different way,
La cual obviamente no querían que se terminara porque son sus culturas.
they didn't want to change. That was the way they were behaving. That was their culture.
Ellos pensaban que tal vez al abonar más o fertilizar más las plantas,
They were aiming to fertilize more and more their crops,
estaban de alguna manera rindiendo sus ganancias,
which for them meant that they were just giving away part of their earnings,
pero al mismo tiempo no se estaba viendo que se estaba contaminando el suelo,
but they were not realizing that that was affecting the soil quality.
o que por sus culturas ellos sabían que estaban haciendo las cosas bien.
They were thinking they were doing things appropriately.
Ahora es lo contrario porque los jóvenes han presentado innovaciones,
Now, on the contrary, young people have innovated.
hay más capacitación,
We have training on the ground.
hay más trabajo que nos enseña cómo proteger nuestras tierras, pero al mismo tiempo cómo generar ganancias.
This when it comes to protecting the soil, but also how can we get better at earning an income.
A través de Comercio Justo hemos recibido capacitaciones, asistencia técnica,
We have received both technical assistance and training on behalf of Fair Trade.
pero para todo eso se necesita financiamiento.
But for all of that, again, we need finance.
No podemos trabajar nuestros cultivos si no hay financiamiento.
We cannot work if we don't have that.
Considero que todos los pasos que actualmente estamos haciendo en el café no se podrían cumplir
And each step we are taking when it comes to our coffee production,
sin que haya apoyo de organizaciones,
without the support of organizations,
de gobiernos,
governments,
directamente para jóvenes,
that go straight
para
to
mujeres.
young people and women producers.
No debemos pensar,
Wrap it up. Okay.
perdón, no debemos pensar que los jóvenes no tienen, que no se les da la oportunidad a los jóvenes porque no tienen experiencia.
Young people have the experience, so that should not be denied.
Es claro, tal vez no tenemos experiencia de estar acá sentadas, hablar,
It's true, maybe we don't have the experience of being here, sitting down, talking,
porque sí es difícil,
because yeah, it's tricky to get here.
pero al final son las personas las que están trabajando en la agricultura
But at the end of the day, they're the ones who are working.
solamente.
Just that.
Okay, Mario. What we've heard is that culture matters, that training of youth matters, and giving respect to youth and women, and that financing matters. So what's Lavazza doing about all those things?
Well, we try. So first of all, we have a few schemes that are, let's say, linking the coffee production with specific issue. For example, here we are in the Ecuadorian, let's say, in the UNDP, and in particular with a project we had in Ecuador, where we linked coffee production with deforestation. So that is one way to help to create a better environment for the grower, and also to create the condition for an increased transfer of value. The point is very clear, but it's also very clear that the market, the coffee market, it goes up and down, and even fair trade in the past was a fixed price, and today is a different formula, which is actually recognizing the fact that the market goes up and down. So, in our opinion, the way to address the issue is to help the community, the coffee grower, to take the maximum advantages of a free market. Because at the end, either we go for a non-free market, which is a possibility, but to imagine to create such a market for 60 countries and 25 million growers, 100 and more million people is a little bit, let's say, maybe difficult to imagine. So as long as we have a free market condition, we think that the best option is to help any participant, for that sake, to optimize his capability living in that market. So everything at the end goes back to capacitation, knowledge, know-how, to be able to take advantage, for example, through organization. It's impossible to imagine that a small grower knows everything in agriculture, post-harvesting processing, commercialization, administration, and so on and so forth. This is almost impossible. So what is in one way is to help the people to get organized, create a cooperative, create an association, create some instrument of having the people working together as the group they have, because I'm sure that they not only have a brand of coffee together, but they also probably share instruments, knowledge, know-how, and the simple fact that she was chosen to represent the community here is part of the story. No, we don't have 600 people here, but there is somebody that is very well representing the group, and maybe there is somebody else that helped the group to commercialize the coffee, or etc., etc. So that is really a little bit the idea we are trying to.
Thank you. Well, so Kathleen and Axel, with your biochar hats on, I would imagine that the question of training is really important, and getting farmer adoption is not that easy, and that financing may not be so easy to come by. And clearly all three of those would be important to scale the industry in coffee. And so can you share some reflections about how that's working now and what needs to happen to get this technology in place?
Sure. I think training is challenging. I've learned a lot over the last few years when I've been traveling down to Latin America. And communication is really critical. An experience I had, lesson learned, was the first time I was trying to have the smallholder farmers prepare their biomass for being carbonized. And the first farm I went to, they took all the long, perfectly formed tree stumps and cut them into tiny little pieces and dried them with coal before we turned them into biochar. And I said, okay, that has a terrible carbon footprint, but I realized I should have been a lot clearer. And then the second farm we went to, they had not cut them up and they had not dried them at all, and the moisture content was about 50%, which also, if you've ever tried to burn something with that much moisture content, is very challenging. So communication is key. I also think it's really important for people, especially in Latin America, to understand that this has been around for thousands of years. Many different indigenous cultures have been doing this with using many different practices. So it's not something that the developed world is imposing. We're just relearning what indigenous cultures did for thousands of years and showing them why it's cost effective. It's got many benefits, as we've all discussed. But it is challenging. Right now, we're trying to figure out how to get that knowledge out to the individual farmers in a cost-effective manner. And the way we're doing it through the project I'm on is the coffee buyer, in this case Car Cafe, they have agronomists that are assigned up to 300 farms per agronomist. And their mission now is, once they've learned how to make biochar, they go out and teach the individual farmers. And they're showing them not only how to make the biochar, how to turn it into a slow-release fertilizer using either the effluent from the coffee milling process or other available biomass, such as the pulp that is very often just composted on farm. So it's a slow process, and we're just at the very beginning. But so far, we're finding a lot of farmer interest because of these added benefits beyond carbon sequestration. So is it scalable? I think we'll see the Excel model scale a lot faster, but I think they're very complementary at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think you point on a very important question, which is, change management and how do you, make those practices, biochar in our case, but, there are many other things in the regenerative agriculture toolbox. How do you make those change get to the farmers? Actually, we were very surprised how easy it is. We thought initially when we launched Net Zero that we would have a lot of challenge to convince people that they would be very reluctant, what is this new thing, and so on. I think there's a new generation of farmers, especially in the coffee industry, like Sunil, who understand the importance of soil health, the importance of changing practices, and we've actually had very easy conversations with farmers, coffee farmers. I'm thinking about in Brazil, where we are setting up our new plants. We have farmers who have committed to buy our biochar even before we start producing it. And they are very interested. And their point of view is, this is an investment in our soils. So it's not an expense like a fertilizer that you put every year. It's an investment for today and for the future generation. And I think all the talking that has taken place around the importance of changing agricultural practices, the importance of soil health, the importance of carbon in the soil, this is trickling down. And so when you come with a solution, actually the adoption can be quite fast. It was a surprise to us, and we thought we're going to be preaching for a number of years. Actually, we thought initially for Net Zero we won't be able to sell all our biochar production, and so part of it we will recondition it as green charcoal to be burnt and avoid deforestation. But then we realized that we could sell everything, and actually there was more demand that we could produce. So I think this is a very good news. I don't mean we don't need to do anything. We've been working with the Earthworm Foundation, with some researchers. We're doing some local training and so on. But the initial kind of reaction to there's a solution, it's made out of your own crop residues and it will go back into your field, the adoption can be quite fast. So actually there's hope, and this is very good news.
Okay, Suli, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Soli, voy a hacer que improvises.
Are you ready to put biochar on your farm yet?
¿Estás lista para poner biochar en tu cosecha? El material este que se hace para fertilizar de tu propia cosecha, que estaban hablando ellos.
Según tengo entendido, ellos estaban hablando que son innovaciones para el café.
Es el producto que tiene ella. ¿Estás lista para colocarla en tu cosecha?
Bueno, considero que en la comunidad siempre va a ser difícil intentar cosas nuevas.
I consider that, in your own community it's always hard to try new things.
Pero depende de mí ir y dar a conocer qué es lo que se está viendo.
But it's my responsibility to cascade what's happening here and letting people know.
Y practicarlo en la comunidad. Siempre he dicho que las parcelas demostrativas son un buen ejemplo.
And to practice it in the community. I've always said that in parcels that's very good. Sorry.
Entonces iniciaríamos de ahí.
We would need to take it from there.
Luego empezar a concientizar a las personas, a los productores.
Then starting to make producers aware.
Que nos animemos a implementar cosas nuevas.
So that we dare to implement something that's new.
En el café.
In the coffee.
If I may just add, I think this is, very pragmatic approach. the nice thing about biochar is the day you start production, there's not enough because you're limited by the supply, in this case of coffee husk. So initially, there's just enough to do some tests, to do some things in tree nurseries. And so actually that gives time for people to kind of observe the change. So it's not, there's unlimited supply and who wants it. So the curve of production goes more or less at the same rate as the curve of trials and adoption. So it can work quite well.
So Mario, this is coming. When is your first biochar installation going to happen?
Well, actually, it seems a coincidence. Actually, is a coincidence. But we just started 6 months ago 2 components of biochar production in one project we have in Mexico and one in Nicaragua with two coffee traders, and I thought it was for barbecuing basically. I said, well, okay, let's see, maybe everybody will do the barbecue after harvesting or things like that. Now, having heard what we heard this morning, but also some other conversation we had parallel to this, I think that is definitively an interesting solution, and I really am strongly interested to understand more, first of all, but if it's basically what we are discussing, frankly speaking, I think that we will be strongly involved in rolling out in all the projects we have, because it's a great, it really looks as a great idea. So we started by coincidence to get close to this biochar. This is really a super input we are getting in understanding better what we are doing indirectly, but also how to really incorporate that into our project, which is some cases for smallholders, some cases for big one. I don't know if we will think about a single solution or a community solution, maybe in a village somewhere. It would be better to build something for the community or not, I don't know, but for sure something that is not expensive. So this one is even creating value, but something that is not expensive and is bringing value to the land, to the environment, is per se a very, very interesting solution.
Great. Thanks for that. We're running a bit short of time, so what I would like to do is let every panelist respond to the question: what advice would you give the world about what needs to happen next to help promote greater environmental and financial sustainability for smallholder coffee growers? And Suli, let's start with you.
Soli, vamos a preguntar. ¿Qué consejo le darías al mundo sobre este tema? Con tus propias palabras, ¿qué consejos?
El consejo que yo les daría es que puedan apoyar a los pequeños productores.
The advice I would give is for people to support small-scale producers.
Definitivamente del café dependen muchas familias.
From coffee, a lot of families depend on.
Necesitamos acciones
We need action
que podamos llevar a cabo, que no solo queden en un papel.
that we can actually implement, that are not just in a piece of paper.
Y lo que necesitamos es que se actúe lo más pronto posible.
And we need them to happen as soon as possible.
Porque si nos damos cuenta, el cambio climático está afectando tanto a los productores,
Because climate change is affecting producers right now,
no solo a los productores de café, a todos los productores en general.
not just coffee producers, any producer.
Por lo mismo necesitamos que nos apoyen, pero que se cumplan esas acciones, no que se queden en papel, sino que se cumplen. Y es alguna responsabilidad muy grande para mí.
We need this not to be just a promise in a piece of paper. Again, we need this to be an action, and this is a big responsibility.
Llegar a mi comunidad y decir, ¿verdad?, de que existen acuerdos para el cambio climático, que existe cómo podemos nosotros apoyar al cambio climático.
I need to go back to my community and tell them, yes, there are agreements when it comes to climate change. Yes, there are discussions that are happening.
Y decir que sí se van a cumplir lo que está escrito.
And promise them that this will indeed happen.
Tal vez no solo en palabras, sino que en acciones.
Not just in words, but in actions.
No que nos envíen recetas prediseñadas las cuales al final no nos sirven.
We don't need prescriptions that have been designed that are not fit for purpose.
Pensemos en las nuevas generaciones
Please, let's think about the next generation
y más que todo en la justicia climática.
and climate justice.
That's a very tricky one. I would say we need to continue to decommoditize coffee. I think there's been a lot of work, and fair trade has been, playing its role here on making sure the way the coffee is grown, the way it's produced, has some value in the end consumer, and the end consumer is willing to pay for that. Sunil was mentioning we need money to transform, to adapt, and I think there's been a very strong decommoditization on the agricultural practices and on the sustainability and then on the fairness of coffee production. I think we need to add the climate part now, and this needs to turn into something that consumer understands and are willing to pay for. Because if you're willing to pay more for low carbon coffee, then that gives a lot of lever locally to do the investment that Sunil was mentioning, to promote the right practices and gradually to move the whole industry. So I think it's not just preaching, oh, we need great coffee and we need carbon neutral coffee. We need, actually, all of us here, we need to pay more for net zero coffee. And when this happens, when this is recognized by the market, then that creates a tremendous incentive for the whole supply chain to start working in that direction. So I would start really from the consumer and the brand.
All right, Kathleen, your advice for a just transition to green coffee?
So from the world looking at farmers, I guess I would say we need to reframe how we view farmers, because I do believe they are going to be the climate heroes moving forward. And as Axel said, we need to value that with our pocketbook. From the farmer's perspective, and I grew up on a farm, so I believe this with my whole heart, is that we need to reimagine waste and think more like the indigenous cultures did, and how Mother Nature does, and not waste anything moving forward.
Well, sorry. Let's say 2 points. One, I'm really, let's say, looking to give some opinion to the more young part of our people. So what I would really say is that as a citizen, my advice, this is what I always say to my kids: be demanding. Be demanding. Be demanding with your politician, be demanding with your country, be demanding with your government, because if we don't ask, we will never get. That's the first question. And the second point is that as a consumer, get informed, study what you are consuming, and it's of course not only coffee, but everything, and then make an informed decision. Those are the things that are really changing. One, of course, is being able to pay what is right to pay, but this is, in my opinion, is not even the most important one. The most important is to ask for that particular characteristic of that you want to see in your product, in the services, in the things that you buy. So use your power as a consumer, and try, of course, to go for a better, let's say, more just, not only transition, but really form of living, no? So that's what I think.
Well, thank you all. I hope that you'll join me in thanking our great panelists, Mario, Kathleen, Axel, and Sully.
Thank you very much.
Julieta, thank you for your translation, and thank you all for being such a great audience.
Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. I
Very
enjoyed,
good.
I
Thank
enjoyed
you.
our conversation.
Yes, very much, very much. Thank you. Yeah,
Hopefully we
perfect.
can be in touch.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm from Fairtrade in Asia Pacific. Perfect. Sanjeet.
Sanjeet, Rando, nice to meet
Hello,
you.
Sanjay.
Hi, how are
Hi,
you?
hi. Nice to see you.
On biochar.